their scare tactic, their fear tactic, showing this hundreds of planes crashing in on New York, and then trying to compare that to natural disasters and tsunamis, saying respect nature, right? I mean, it was a complete fear campaign. Did you see? Were you privy to that video?
Well, no, I don't know if I saw I saw a still that came from some advertising agency. I believe this is the same thing, that it's, it's a sort of photoshopped idea of dozens of planes descending on Manhattan.
Yeah, they have a very distasteful CGI rendering of the first plane hitting the North Tower, the second plane hitting the South Tower. Then they're like, in 2001, 2,000 people died, or 3,000 people died on 9/11, and they give the stats, and then they said, in 2005, 200,000 people died in a tsunami. That's like 100 9/11s, and nature is awesome, so respect it, or it'll kick your ass. I mean, that was the whole basis of the commercial. I was like, one has nothing to do with the other, except they're both being controlled and manipulated by eugenicists who believe that they deserve to, be left here with this planet by themselves, with depopulation and all sorts of other plans that they have been dumb enough to write down. I mean, when you get into H.G. Wells's work and the new Machiavelli's, the New World Order, these ideas come out and he's presenting them. It's not unlike Colonel House's work. And this takes me back to Tragedy and Hope and page 930, where Carroll Quigley says, hey, this myth, like all fables, does have a fact of modicum of truth. And he says these roundtable groups exist, the Council on Foreign Relations, this dominant Rhodes Trust, and how they manipulate the world. And Carroll Quigley says, I have no aversion to this. And J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller and the Whitney families are all involved. And it's like, when there's so much you don't know that they're using to keep you in the dark, it's no wonder that people believe the official story. So I don't blame anybody for not seeing around this. It's very complicated, and you have to do a lot of work to see what James and I are talking about. And I think a lot of people in your audience are hip to that, but they have, trouble communicating that to other people. We haven't been able to reach critical mass and getting people to understand yet.
I wanted absolutely, yet being the operative word. I wanted to reference and mention a couple things as we're talking about these families, and we're talking about, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, and you even just mentioned H.G. Wells, which of course most folks know him from Time Machine and War of the Worlds and things like that, but he also wrote books with titles called The Open Conspiracy and New World Order.
Right.
And these guys that we earlier on referred to as multi-generational serial killers or gangsters, and whether or not there's only, a dozen families in these special bloodlines that control everything, I'm not quite convinced of in a way. I think you've made the analogy that it's perhaps also like a high-stakes poker table, that people have been able through the last century or so to been able to sort of buy their way in. And there, I think, is where we see the sort of the Bill Gateses and the Ted Turners. And then that brings us to eugenics.
Bill Gates' father takes you right to eugenics. His dad was in charge of Planned Parenthood, which was a Rockefeller operation, and it was basically focused toward the lower classes, and it's a type of racial hygiene in practice, which was invented in the United States and then exported through its financiers to Germany, right? And it's like, if we just depend on what they taught us in school, then we are exactly as dumb as they want us to be, because they taught you only what they wanted you to know, and they held back what they didn't want you to see. And it's like, for people to continue to trust media after there are quotes out there. Here's Richard Salant, former president of CBS News. He said, our job is to give people not what they want, but what we decide they ought to have. He's deciding what you should have to make decisions. And, if you're not exactly where you want to be in the world, it's because the information you're using to make your decisions is not based on as, close to reality as it could be. There's many other quotes that illustrate this, but the point is that unless you create your own media company, then you really never know from these other companies that are publicly traded for-profit corporations that take all these crazy ads for pharmaceuticals and Monsanto products. I mean, you have to understand they don't have the same, interest. You're interested in like clean water, clean, fresh food, having happiness with your family, having some security, healthcare, things like this. Those people, they're worried about, who getting a bigger yacht than Larry Ellison or earning more than Larry Ellison next year. They have totally different priorities, and we just have to recognize that. It's nothing you need to hate,
And it's these guys again, and what we've referenced throughout this talk is that they've written it down, and it's in books, and it's in white papers written by white guys. And as you have noted before, as said by Alan Dulles, who was the director of the CIA, who I believe was fired by John F. Kennedy, yet then Alan Dulles was appointed to investigate the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Alan Dulles said in referencing the Warren Commission report, well, the American, they don't read.
Yeah, that's how they'll believe it. They don't read it, because the 9/11 Commission report, when I read that, I lost all faith in any commission or anyone else doing justice for us, because it's like I gave the benefit of the doubt to the people who we supposedly elected as our leaders, because I was naive enough to think that's how they got there, at that time. But after I read the 9/11 Commission report, I was totally beside myself, because not only did they leave out a bunch of key facts that I knew about and were, readily known, and these people were trying to testify, but then, the people who ran it were almost like the ghouls and gangsters who oversaw the whole operation in the first place. And it's like, it's almost like the whole thing was an intelligence operation. And in the days right after 9/11, the FBI went to something called the Whitney Museum. Now, the Whitney family helped to found Skull and Bones, along with the Russell family and whatnot. They have a museum in New York. It's a very expensive, very posh, very exclusive museum. And they had the work of this gentleman named Mark Lombardi hanging in their galleries. Now, Mark did this type of art called network diagramming. And what he would do is he'd write somebody's name, and then he'd draw a circle, and then he'd draw a circle to all the people they did business with, and then you'd have a big diagram, it's called global networks, that would tell you who does business with who and where the money goes and where the money flows. And he tracked all these unusual transactions with the Vatican back scandal and the SNL scandal and the BCCI scandal and George Bush and bin Laden family doing business, since 1977. This was all in his art. It was on the walls. The FBI went to the Whitney Museum, and the Whitney said, well, you can't have a private showing. You can see it with the public. And that's it, basically saying you can't study this stuff. Now, oddly enough, Mark Lombardi was found dead on March 22nd, 3/22 of 2000. So on 3/22/2000, this guy who's putting Skull and Bones money laundering skills and schemes into his art is found hung right before one of his biggest showings and a rise in his popularity. The Whitney Museum and the Jewish Museum in New York exclusively own all of Mark Lombardi's work, and it's no longer on public showing, so the only way you can really see it is in this book that's on Amazon.com. Now,
well, but again, as we're mentioning the Whitney Museum, it's something that, my brother went to New York to do graphic design and to do art. He said, many years ago, I want to be in the Whitney Biennial. So it's something that, up-and-coming artists want to be involved in. And when you see someone like Mark Lombardi and his work, and at the pivotal moment where he was about to gain a wider audience for his work, he kills himself?
Well, they just, from a conspiratorial side, I guess, because I don't believe he hung himself to one degree. And Jerry Mazza had also done some research and investigation, looked at the police reports, and it stinks. The whole thing stinks. But I guess the point would be, it was a Democracy Now! Program where they basically talked to the curator who was taking his work on tour. And after noticing that his book's produced by the Rothschild Foundation and the Whitney family, I found it very interesting that they had a very limited showing of his work post 9/11, let people see it, but then they put it away. And I thought, how tragic for all that work to get put away so easily. So what I started doing was, for the past 6 years, I've used this software called The Brain, and you can get it at thebrain.com. And basically, I've loaded all the types of things that Mark put into his art, only I put it into an interactive electronic format where it clicks to the Wikipedia pages and connects all the facts together. And so with these 3,500 ideas of, people and events and where the money goes, it illustrates and answers all your questions. And on topics you don't know about, then you can go in and search that topic and see what it connects to that you might know about. And you can learn your way out from there. So it's kind of how, we do appreciate the fact that somebody before us did try to leave some information behind to make our job easier of figuring out what exactly is going on and how do we make informed decisions for ourselves and learn to think critically to survive, other people who have plans of eugenicizing the rest of us.
I think the connection and the confluence